everyone. How are you today? I'm so happy to be here with you talking about one of my favorite topics, which is unit testing and how to write proper unit tests. First, I want to start by saying hello to everyone who are connected and especially to those who are in the chat, such as Rahul, Tech Lead Cloud Consulting, MacGyver Oliveira, Juan Rodriguez, Ashwani, Niket, Eric, and Leonardo. Some people joining from Brazil, some people joining from Nicaragua, from India. This is amazing. I always enjoy so much being able to connect to people from all over the world. Okay, and with that, let me start sharing my screen and tell you about what we're going to do today, and maybe not only today, but on a subsequent codeLive, because I think I have a lot of content and I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover everything today, but we will try our best. And if not, of course, I will do a codeLive in a few weeks. Also, hello to Simon or Simon, I don't know the correct pronunciation, who's joining from South Africa and who just wrote in the chat. So we're going to talk about unit testing, and I'm going to focus on Apex unit tests. And also in the future, I may do a codeLive about LWC unit testing. And I'm going to start from scratch. So I'm going to start talking about the basics, and then we will complicate the thing over and over, okay? Hope that not too much, but we're going to do a progressive codeLive. So first of all, I always love to start talking about unit tests, talking about the test automation pyramid. Why? Because especially in Salesforce, when writing Apex tests, there is a lot of confusion on what are unit tests and what are other kinds of tests, such as integration tests or end-to-end tests. So unit tests are like the most basic ones, are the ones that you write to test what your methods are doing. And because they are the most basic ones, they must be small and they must test just one thing. And I'm telling this because I'm seeing many orgs in which the Apex unit tests are just immense. And that's fine. But I just wanted to make the distinction because those are not really unit tests. Those are more like integration tests, and sometimes they can even be end-to-end tests. So unit tests are the ones that you need to write to make sure that your methods are working as expected. You can write them for backend code and also for front-end code. And because they are here in the automation pyramid, they are the most abundant, the fastest, and the cheapest. You write them very quickly, you execute them very often, and they are the ones who are going to help you detect bugs and regressions very early in the process, and also incorporate new features with confidence. If you have a really good set of unit tests operating, executing in your CI/CD jobs, it's going to be very easy for you to detect if a method is not working as you expect it to work, because maybe you changed something and you introduced a regression without unintentionally, okay? Because of this, because they help detect bugs that early, they help having a much faster development life cycle and also more frequent releases. If you're thinking about adopting a CI/CD I forgot the name, CI/CD workflow, especially when you are thinking about continuous deployment or development, which means releasing very faster, right? Unit tests are going to be your best ally. And also, they are going to help you improve the code. Because when designing unit tests, you need to think about all the different use cases that your method can have, right? All the different ways in which your method can be called. And that is going to help you identify use cases that you weren't handling in your production code. Okay? So, said that's general unit testing. When we think about Apex testing on the Salesforce platform, there are some special things to bear in mind. So first of all, the tests run on the platform, you need to deploy them. They don't see your org's data, which means that you need to create the data as part of your data test setup. And you need a minimum 75% code coverage to deploy your code to production, which is great because this is forcing us to make sure that our code is working as expected. But be careful there because code quality is not the same as code quantity. And I'm sure that many of you here on the chat and on the stream today have seen unit tests or integration tests which were really not testing anything, and unit tests which were not really scalable or which were really difficult to fix and to maintain. And because of that, I wanted to have this codeLive today because it's a topic that I like. I've wrote a lot of unit tests in my past Salesforce developer life before becoming a Salesforce developer advocate. And I wanted to share all that with you. So because this is a codeLive, we're going to do a demo, right? And we're going to be working with this class here. It is a class called Unit Testing Love, in which I have created some methods. And we're going to create unit tests for these methods. And we're going to start seeing some tips and tricks that I used to use when I created unit tests like quite a lot in the past for like real production use cases, and that I also try to incorporate when I write in tests for sample apps and the code that I create now. So before continuing, I want to say hello to some of the people that I'm seeing in the chat. I want to say hello to Miguel Angel from Colombia, Shitang from India, and Ravi from India. Thank you so much for those who are connected, especially for those who are in India, because I know it's late for you. So I hope that you really enjoy this codeLive and that you find it useful. So the first method with which we are going to work is this sum method, which is very simple. It's a method that is receiving two integers as parameter, and it's returning the sum of the integers. And when I start thinking about writing unit tests for my code, I like to first write the test cases. So what I do is that I start something like this and I say, okay, my first test case is going to be, for instance, A it's equal 3 and B is equal 2. And with these parameters, the condition should be, the result should be 5. That's going to be one of my test case. But one thing to bear in mind is that we should always test for edge use cases. And edge use cases for this method could be, for instance, receiving null parameters. So in this case, I'm going to think about another use case, which is, okay, if A equals null and B equals 2, for instance, what's going to happen here? I've just detected that my method is not handling null values correctly. Just while thinking about the test cases that I need to write for it. That's why test-driven development, TDD, it's so helpful because it helps you with TDD, you think first in the test cases, and that helps you write the production code according to the business requirement that your logic has. And also, TDD helps you to just write the code that you need, because sometimes developers will love writing code and we end up like writing much more code than the one that it's really needed. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this, and when A equals null, equals null, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to throw an exception, and I already created an exception class, a custom exception class, which is called operation not permitted exception. Okay, and here we are going to pass message, for instance, I don't know, A is null. Okay, so for this test case, I can now know that the result is an exception is wrong. But there's something else. You saw that? This is Einstein for Developers, new code completion. Let me see if it does it again. It's inline code completion capabilities that Einstein for Developers is giving to me. I pressed enter very quick and you didn't see that, but the line was exactly what I was about to write right now, okay? So I'm going to write, okay, another use case in which A equals 3, for instance, B equals null, and in this case, I also want to test that my code is writing an exception. This means that I need to check also for this operation here. Okay, are all parameters. Param is no. Okay. Why am I testing these two different use cases? Well, because code coverage calculation is going to take into account all the different paths through which your code can go. And my code may come through this path. It may come through this path, or it may skip this completely because neither A nor B are null and go to this line directly, okay? So it is a good idea to always write unit tests for all the different conditions that you have in your code, not only for the happy path, which is this one here, okay? So once I have this, testing the happy path is super easy. It's like what everyone does and knows how to do. You annotate the method with @is_test, and then you write static void. And something that I like doing is to use a method name that is super descriptive. So for instance, instead of saying some test positive, which is what Einstein is recommending or suggesting to me, I like doing something like this, like some, then explain like the conditions or the use case, when in this case is happy path, and then returns so. For instance, I like using this name convention in which I first name the method that I'm testing, then the use case. Happy path is probably not a good name, but I could normally you are not going to have like simple methods like this one, and it's going to be much easier to think about a method name. And then I normally tend to write what I'm expecting to happen for that method when that unit test executes. And something that I also like doing is to write given, when, and then. Why? Because writing this helps me like have in my mind very clear the different sections that I need to write in this test, and it helps me identify that my test is only testing one thing. Because if you have so many things here in the when part, it means that your unit test could be divided in more. And if it's divided in more, it's going to be much better, because when one unit test fails, it's going to be much easier to identify which was the source of the problem. Okay? So this pattern is a pattern that Martin Fowler created, which is an eminence, a very important person in the world of Salesforce development that has nothing to do with Salesforce. It's not something that we have created for Salesforce, or it's not something that I love just because I invented it. It's Martin Fowler's creation. And this defines like the different sections that you need to have in your unit test. So for instance, given, it's going to be the data that your test needs to process or needs to insert so that you can test your method. Because remember, tests don't see what you have in your OR. So for instance, here, because I'm going to zoom to integers, we're going to start with the first test case, which is this one. Okay, test case 1. We're going to move this to the bottom so we are not confused. I'm going to define another integer, which is going to be b. And then when unit testing love dot sum a plus b is called, this is going to return an integer. Okay. And then having this then part makes me make sure that my test has assertions, which is best practice, because we want the test to be meaningful and to help you, to be your ally when executing and detecting problems in your code and detecting regressions. We are not writing tests just because we need to pass the 75%, or that should be the case, okay? So my assertions are going to be greeting with the assert class. This is the newest class that we have to implement our assertions. And we can do something like this. Okay. And then what we are going to do, okay, here we could say just 5, but I like to not hard code values. So what I'm going to do is to do the sum myself, a plus b, which are these parameters here, variables. And then here, I'm going to check if this expected value is equal to the received value. And that's it. Very simple test. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to deploy this to the OR. And I'm going to deploy this to the OR also because I changed the operation. Yeah, I think that the class that I created doesn't receive a parameter. Let me deploy this again. Okay, no, it's not that. It's that I forgot the new keyword, okay? Because exception classes need to be constructed. Okay, so both class deployed, and because both class deployed, I can now go ahead and run my test. We're going to do that. Now it's running. Okay, and it passed, and it covered the 26% of my code. One trick here is that you can activate the code coverage highlighter. And if I run this test again, this code coverage highlighter should do something in my tested class. Let's see, okay, there it is. And show me the lines that my test is going through, which are the lines, the lines in green, and the lines that I'm not covering. And you see, this is another way of detecting which use cases you are not covering. Before continuing, I'm going to take a look at the comments. So there is a question from Vikas. How can we write an Apex test class for a class that is using Apex test result objects, as we cannot create these object records. Okay, there are some cases in which it is not possible to test the given functionality. On those cases, what I recommend you to use is mocking. I'm going to do a mocking example at the end of the session. And this is the technique that I've already used when there is a class for which I cannot create records, or for which I cannot, or a class that cannot be called from text content, something like that. What you do is to create a wrapper that calls that class, and you test that the wrapper is being called. Okay, we're going to take a look at that a little bit later. And then Culture by Pop is asking if it is important to name a class with tests. You can call the class however, whatever you want, but this is my recommendation because it's really easy to see when you take a look at the files. If you have them in the same folder, the test classes and the regular classes, they are going to stick together, one next to the other, and it's going to be easier to understand or to find the test class. So although it's not compulsory, I recommend you doing that. There is another question from Jesus Blanco saying, regarding unit testing versus integration testing in Apex, your recommendation is to write only unit tests? No, sorry. If that was not clear, maybe I explained myself badly. So you should be written the three of them. You should be written unit test, the most abundant ones, then integration test, a little bit less, and then end-to-end test, the least number of tests. Why? Because these are more costly to write and also to maintain. Okay, this philosophy is called shifting left, which in the pyramid it's in reality shifting to the bottom, right? That you should try to invest most of your time writing unit tests because those are like the most effective. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have integration tests. You should have ideally the three kind of tests in your org. And there is a question from Santanu Roy, which is it possible to increase the font size? Yes, of course. Let me do that. Maybe it's not easy to see, but if not, I can close this class and we can do it in a different way. I'm going to remove the, I'm going to leave it because it's going to give us some hints. Something that I wanted to show, the debugger. So you see here we have a debug test button, and this debug test is going to launch your test with the Apex Replay Debugger. The Apex Replay Debugger is like an interactive debugger that behind the scenes is working on a different way because it's retrieving the debug logs from your org, and it is using them to give you the experience of an interactive debugger. But because it is like an interactive debugger, you can add breakpoints. For instance, here, we can add a breakpoint here. I'm going to add a couple of them. Okay. And when we click on the button, debug test, okay, the debug view opens up, which is this view here. And here we see many things which are really interesting. So first of all, we see that the debugger is stopping in my different breakpoints. And from here, I can like continue to the next breakpoint, or I can step over, I can like do all the typical operations that you can do in an interactive debugger. Also, I can take a look at the value of my variables. This is much more effective than using system.debug, right? Because you can take a look at a lot of things at the same time. I can also take a look at the variables here on this section. I can add watch expressions. And I think if I write, no, this is not working. Okay, I thought that if you wrote things here, it was going to like let me interact with the code, but it doesn't. So here I can step over and see, for instance, now the value of B is 2. I can step over and notice that it went to my production code. So that's not only stop on my test code, but also in my production code. And I can see here if what the code is going, what's the next time that is going to. And for instance, here I can see sum, the value of sum, and here I can like finalize the execution. So this is very handy and I use it a lot. With that, let me go back to the overview because we are going to continue testing the second use case for the sum method, okay? Which is going to be testing an exception. And this is something that is supposed to be simple, but most of the places I have seen, most of the Apex classes that I have seen don't do it like 100% correct, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so in this case, we want to test an exception. So we're going to start with is test, and then we're going to write static void. My method is sum. Here, my use case, my test case is going to be A equals null, and Einstein for developers is auto-completing. If I press tab or if I click in this button, I can accept the suggestion. Fantastic, I love it. It's working pretty well. Oh, icons now. Okay, and here we are going to start the same. And see, Einstein for developers is already telling me, oh no, the problem is that if you type, it disappears. But it was a good suggestion. There it is. I'm going to accept it. So I want to start with A equals null and B equals 2. And now I want to type the when part and the then part. But this time, what I want to test is that when my sum method is called, I'm going to copy this, an exception is thrown. Okay? So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to use a try catch. Why? Because if we don't do that and an exception is wrong, my test method is going to fail. Okay? So we need to do try here and we need to do catch here. Okay? Typical try catch. And then here, there are several options. If you catch regular exceptions, it may happen that the exception that arrives is not the one that you are testing. And then what you need to do is to use the instance of a method to check the exception type. My preference, what I prefer doing is to, if I'm waiting for a specific exception, test for that one, check that that one is being thrown. Why? Because if a different exception is thrown, my test method is going to fail, which is fine because I'm expecting this one specifically and testing this line. And I prefer to do it this way, okay? So now here you can check a couple of things. So one of the things is to test the exception message. And let me copy here, like the best way to do that. The best way that we recommend, or the best practice that we recommend to do here, is to test something like this. I'm going to paste it because I don't want to copy, to type over and over. Okay. It could be assert dot is true, so whatever is here needs to be true. And what I'm going to test is that exception.getMessage.equals ignore case, and here I need to test the expected exception message. Okay, in this case, we're going to fix that, and we're going to write what I had at the beginning that I couldn't save because I was missing the okay, it already saved. Sorry, I forgot that I already saved this. So the message is param is null. So what we are going to test here is that the exception message says param is null. So with this technique, we are testing the exception type and also the exception message, okay? And this will be really the then part. This is the assertion that I'm doing to ensure that my exception is being thrown. Let me this way, and let me deploy, and let me run this and see if it works. Okay, it worked, but something is wrong here. People on the chat, who here can tell me what is wrong with this unit test? Santanu says how to handle the instance of in the exception test. You actually don't need to do that because I'm catching only this exception type. So if you do that, you don't need to use the instance of. It is something else. It is something else. Somebody else. Somebody else, come on. Okay. I'm going to tell you. So what happens if under these conditions, this this method call is not throwing an exception? For instance, if I'm going to remove this because my eyes are hurting already. So for instance, imagine that my method didn't have this. In this case, well, maybe it was throwing an exception because it threw an exception because A was equals to null. But if this method, if this call under these conditions doesn't throw an exception, the method, the unit test method, is not going to enter into the catch part. I don't have any assertions, so my test is going to pass, although it's not going to make this assertion. That means that the test is not actually testing 100% that an exception is being thrown. How can we do that? Very easy, and this is what most people forget. And again, Einstein for developers help me with that. Amazing. So what we do is, if this method doesn't fail, it's going to try to execute the next line. And in the next line, we can use this method, which was introduced specifically to test exceptions, which is assert.fail, which is going to make our test automatically fail. And in this case, if my test is not, if my production code is not throwing an exception under these conditions, it is going to, my test is going to fail. So this is what you should remember to do when testing your exceptions, because almost everyone forgets doing that. Okay, I'm going to redeploy my code and I'm going to run again and it should pass. Okay, so these were two very simple use cases. Let's go with the next one. The next one, we're going to start talking about how to load data, right? Because in this case, the data that I need to set, to create, to be able to execute my method was very simple. But in most of the cases, you will need to create like much more complex data. By the way, I'm seeing, maybe if I do this, no. Okay, so maybe like this you can see. Let's do it this way, like this. You can see my screen better because it's a little bit bigger. Okay, so next method that we want to test. It's a method that verifies if an account is active. It is a method that is receiving as parameter a contact, and it's checking if that contact's account is active. Okay, so we need to have the account as well. If it's active, it's returning true, and if it's not active, it's returning false. Very simple. So when imagine that we already implemented this use case. I'm going to skip it, okay? And I'm going to start with a test for verify account is active. So in this case, I'm going to accept the suggestion for Einstein. We are going to write a method that says verify account is active. We're going to pass in an active account and it's going to return true. This is amazing. I love it. Okay. What are we going to do this? So we know that our method needs contact and it needs an account, right? First, we are going to create an account because contact depends on account. I'm going to accept the Einstein suggestion, which is name. I'm going to use name Acme and active yes, perfect. And then I'm going to create a contact. And for that contact, I'm going to assign an account, which is this one. And I'm going to insert the account, okay? And then we can test that when unit testing love dot verify account is active receives that contact, returns true, okay? Then we are going to assert dot is true result, okay? And here we're going to add a message because it's a best practice. Account is not active while it should. Or no, yeah, sorry. A method does not return true when it should. Okay, one tip here. When I have two parameters, so for instance, in this case, when I have two parameters in the assert method, I tend to not include the message because the message that comes up when the unit test fails is already very self-descriptive because it says this was the expected value and this is what you got. Although PMD is telling me that I should include one parameter, but I don't normally do it. However, when I use the is true or is false ones, then I do include a description because if not, the message that the unit test throws is not as self-descriptive, okay? That's what I normally do. And something that I forgot to say is that it is also a best practice, as I've not been doing here, to enclose your unit test between start test and stop test, because that's going to reset the limits and it's going to synchronize asynchronous code calls. Okay, much better now. Okay, so this I hope is going to save and I hope it works, but now we're going to take a look at the way of improving this test. Okay, the test is running. Well, there was a failure. Let me take a look. Well, this is super. Unit testing love. Insert failed. Cannot specify ID in an insert call. Line 52. Oh, because I'm inserting account again. So insert contact, deploy. I think it's going to tell me that I need to specify here a first name also. Laura, for instance, last name equals Jones. Okay, deploy this again. Okay, let me run it. Thank you very much for all of you who are writing in the chat, who already saw that. Sometimes when you are writing and speaking at the same time, you don't see things. It happens to me a lot. Okay, so it worked, but there is a way in which we can improve this test, especially its execution time. Can any of you tell me which way is that one? Okay, I'm taking a look at. Okay, so there was a question from Manu Villen, who is exactly what I just mentioned, the usage of test.start test and test.stop test. Use it always, because this resets the limits. So any DML operations and SQL queries and so on that you have performed in your data setup part are going to be reset if you use start test. So I recommend using them always. And no more questions here and no suggestions. So my suggestion here is to just don't think very carefully when you need to insert the objects and when you don't, because this method works exactly the same if you don't insert the records. So if I deploy this way, it's gonna work, okay? My test is gonna work. And I'm going to save time because I'm not going to be inserting anything into the database. And there are a lot of tricks for doing things like this. For instance, if you want to assign, let's say that your method needs an account ID, okay? That's something that you can mock, okay? That's something that you can get, for instance, let me open the org. I went to a different window. Okay, let me open the org here. If you go to accounts, something that I normally do when I want to use fake IDs, what I do is I go to one record of the records of the type of records that I want to use, because those records in the URL have like the ID, and then I go to my test code and I use that ID. And if my method is using that ID for any reason, but it doesn't need that my account is inserted into the database, my unit test is going to be much more efficient if I do it this way. Integration tests are a different thing, because in integration test, you are normally testing how things stick together, how all the different methods, triggers, etc., operate over your records and your data, right? But for unit tests, it's perfectly fine to try to make them as lightweight as possible, because the purpose of unit test is just testing that your method is doing what you expect it to do, okay? And of course, for this method, we should create another one that checks the false path. And also we could check what happens when contact is null, when the account is null, and things like that. Okay, we should do all that. So said that we need to think about making our test integration as lightweight as possible. Now, there are different ways in which we can improve this unit test class, especially when we start having more tests in there. And one of the ways in which you can improve it is by using better methods to create your test data. Because when you start creating your more tests, what's going to happen is that you're going to see this given part repeated over and over and over. So there are several techniques that we're going to see that help you have your code cleaner. And one person in the chat, Jordan Parra, already pointed to one of those techniques, which is if you are doing inserting accounts and contacts, or you are creating accounts and contacts in this method and in another test method and in another test method, why don't you just create a method that creates account and contact, right? And you call it from all the places where you want to do that. That would be a better approach, okay? And then call that method from here, okay? Maybe you need to return the contact here, something like that, okay? Contact. And then here we could do something like this. Well, whatever, okay? So this is a better approach. But there are many frameworks and patterns that are even better, okay? One typical pattern is to move your whole data creation to a specific class. For instance, test, create Apex class, and we can call the class, for instance, contact test data factory. Okay, we can move this method to here. We can make it public, and then we can call it from here, but we can also call it from other test class, okay? We could even do like much more advanced things. Let's say that I want to have all the records that are created available in my unit test. So something that I can do is to convert this into a class with non-static methods, with instance methods, okay, and have instance variables such as contact, count, okay. And something that I can do is to, instead of return things here, public void, okay, just assign values to these objects, to these records, so I can access that value from my unit test class. In that case, what I would need to do is to do new contact test data factory, because in this case, what we're going to do, I'm going to do it in 2 lines. We're going to create an instance of the class first, okay? Test data factory. Then I'm going to call create account and contact, and then I'm going to use here my contact class, okay? This is another approach. My method is just initializing the value of some variables, Uh, Let me remove this. I'm going to deploy. I don't know if it will compile because I wrote it very quick. Yeah, it compiled. And here I'm instantiating that data factory. I'm calling and saying that it needs to create account and contact data, or maybe I could call this initialize or something like that. And then I'm using the public instance variables that are exposed in my data factory. Is another even slightly better approach, okay? And if we go one step further, we can even use some frameworks, some design patterns that are out there that very smart developers have created already and that are going to help you create your test data. And this is one of them, one pattern that I love, which is called Apex Domain Builder, okay? This was written by Robert Sossaman, who is a Salesforce MVP. And this is a framework that you install. It has some classes that you install in your org, that you deploy to your org, and that you can extend, and that allow you to create data in a very flexible way and in a way that is easy to maintain and that all developers and the project will understand, okay? So if you're interested in this topic, I recommend you to take a look at this pattern. I'm going to put it in the chat, okay? And yeah, and you can take a look. I'm going to take a look at the questions here. Okay, so there is a question from Nick. Can you show an example of test class for Visualforce page extension controller? Nick, I'm sorry, but Visualforce is not a topic that we are touching anymore because we are wanting everyone to upgrade to Lightning Web Components, and it's like a pretty old technology, so I cannot help you with that. But there are some nice videos and responses all over the internet, Google, YouTube, and so on that you can check. Then Sagar is asking about hardcoding IDs. He's saying that hardcoding IDs, it is not a good practice. Of course, it's not a good practice in production code. And if you are working with integration tests, not. But if you're writing unit tests, it's like mocking, okay? We're going to see mocking next. I don't think I'm going to have time today for showing you mocking, but on the next codeLive, I will show it. We will use mocking to write tests for this unit test here, for this method here, okay? We're going to mock the tax service instance class. And for unit tests, that's perfectly fine. If you don't need to insert your data, and that ID is going to help your unit test run faster, as long as your test is testing what your method is doing, it is okay. Then there is another question from Kiran. If we did bulk testing, then hard code IDs are good to use or not? I'm not sure what you mean with bulk testing, Kiran. Matheus Machado. Same question about hard-coded IDs and sandboxes. The test is not going to fail because unit tests don't see the data that is in your sandbox, okay? We are hard-coding IDs in the test. I'm not hard-coding here anymore because I don't need it, but maybe it could happen that it makes sense for my test, probably not in a test data setup, okay? But in the code that we had before at the beginning, it could happen that it makes sense for my test to just, let me go back to there, to just mock that ID, to give a fake value to that ID, okay? Because my method is not going to be working, is not going to be inserting records in the database or reading records in the database in this specific use case, I'm saying, and in use cases that are similar, okay? In those cases, it's perfectly fine. And it's not going to fail because your unit test is not, first of all, your unit test is not interacting with the database at all, because this account is not being inserted in the database. I'm just testing what this method does. So it's perfectly fine to use it in that case. And second, even if we were inserting records in the database, well, first of all, you cannot insert a record with an ID. But if we were doing something like working with account IDs in the database, because you need to create accounts as part of your test, we are not seeing the data that is in your sandbox or your production org. And that's why your tests are independent of the data that exists in your sandbox or production org, because they are not going to see that data. They are going to see just the data that you create. And that's a best practice, and they should be written that way. Hope that does help. Okay. Eric, thanks for the patterns sharing. Do you know some patterns for external callout mockup testing? Well, for external callouts, the typical approach is to use the HTTP callout mock. And I don't know any like specific open source patterns that are built specifically for mocking callouts, but we're going to see when I talk about mocking in the next codeLive 3 different patterns that can help you with mocking. One of them is fflib Apex mocks. The second one is Apex mockery, and the third one is zero dependencies framework. And these 3 patterns are good for mocking in general. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste them just in case you want to take a look. I'm not going to have time to explain this today, but I promise I will be back very soon. Yeah, so Jordan is talking specifically about mocking, which is this topic. Mocking means faking. Okay, so faking data, faking behavior as well, faking what your methods do. And the purpose of mocking is to decouple dependencies, so our test only tests whatever lines are written in the tested method and not other lines that are written in other tests, in other classes or other methods. Okay, but I need time to explain that more in depth. I'm going to explain one last tip regarding test data creation. So let me recover what I had. So imagine that it happens that all the tests in this test class, imagine that I don't have this here, okay? And that I have I have the positive case and I have the negative case, for instance. And the negative case should do something like after equals false. Okay, here we can do something like that. And then active. We can improve our, let me deploy this and let me, oh, 1 second. So, okay, like this, and mixing programming languages. So we could create something like that, okay? Is false, result doesn't return false, what issue? So I'm going to deploy all the files together because they have dependencies, and if not, it's going to fail. I have a problem in the data factory. Oh, it's a string here. So yeah, active, and then here we need to pass no, and here we're going to pass yes. Okay, let me see if this saves. When you have dependencies of the classes, instead of saving class by class, it's much more convenient to use the sf deploy project start command. Okay, so now we see that the test data creation is being repeated over and over. Okay, maybe I'm not picking the best example because really what I wanted to mention is what to do when you see that two test methods have the same data creation, okay? Or that you need to create to do some pre-creation of data so that you can create your contacts. So for instance, something like that. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. We are going to do test data factory dot create account. Okay, we're going to do something like this, and we are going to change our test data factory class, and in one of the methods we're going to create the account. We're going to do it this way. It's going to be more meaningful. Okay, so we're going to have one method that creates the account. Oh, okay. Sorry, it's not going to work what I wanted to show you because I need to pass the active here. So imagine simply, let's go back to the previous example, that we have two very similar test data setup like rows, statements that we are doing in both classes. So something that we can do here is to use the add test.setup annotation, because this is going to execute every time that, so before each of the tests. So for instance, if my test data setup, if my tests are having some common logic that is repeated over and over, okay, on all the different tests, it's going to be cleaner if I move those statements to this test setup method. And the behavior is going to be equivalent because the test setup method is going to execute before each of my unit tests. So it's going to execute before this line and before this line. And it's a nice way of having your code better organized and have less repetition into the code. Okay? So there are some more questions. Jordan says that he's excited for the next session. Thank you so much. I think it's going to be in 2 weeks. I'll try my best. 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I'll try my best to do it as soon as possible. Geronimo, our hard-coded IDs might be giving issues with new subjects which are propagated through sandboxes and the prefix is not stable. Yeah, it's the same comment as before. Hard-coding IDs is a problem in your production code, not in your unit test code, okay? In your unit test code, it's like mocking, like faking what some of your code is doing. So it's not incorrect. In your integration test, maybe, but in your unit test, definitely you can do it. Okay, so let me take a look. Yeah, the next thing that I wanted to do was mocking. So I think I'm going to stop here. And next time, we're going to see mocking and we are going to see some Lightning Web Components test. Okay, and some tips and tricks for Lightning Web Components test. Before closing, I wanted to share some Trailhead modules. Okay, first Trailhead module about unit testing is review testing fundamentals. Second Trailhead modules, there you have, prepare for unit testing, and third Trailhead module, write unit tests. These 3 modules have been written for developers. They go from basics to advanced. This one is the most difficult one. And they have been reviewed for Trailblazer DX. So before there was a module that contained a lot of content, just a single module, and we have reviewed everything and organized it in different modules so it's easier to complete. So take a look at them before the next class. The next class, we're going to focus on this, how to use mock and stub objects. And we're going to see some patterns and some libraries to do that, which is like taking this thing that I show you, the thing of mocking, like not inserting the data in the database and use fake values if your method being tested doesn't need to do that, is taking that to the extreme, right? Because what we're going to do with mocking is, for instance, if we are testing this method here, we're going to give a fake implementation to this get tags method so that our test doesn't call the whole thing, but only the statements that belong to the method being tested. And we're going to see that in the next codeLive. With that, I'm going to close. First, I wanted to ask you if you have any questions about what we saw today or about any other things. I hope it was helpful. I know it was basic, but I think it's important with some topics to start from the basics, because if you don't have like proper training, proper people to learn from, it's very easy to do it the wrong way. I am very lucky because I had people, amazing people, masters to learn from, and I learned all this from them, right? And also from their code reviews, and also because I worked for a company in which quality was a must, okay, code quality. But I know that that's not the case for many people, and that's why I wanted to do this codeLive. Tiago has a question. Okay, what's the advantage to use TestSetup? Yeah, so by using TestSetup, you simply have a code that is cleaner because you move all those repeated lines that we had in here. You saw that here we have these lines, and here in this test, we have exactly the same. So by using TestSetup, you just need to write those lines once, and thus your code is cleaner. Okay? Fantastic. So with that, Tech Lead Consulting is asking if I learned from Andres Perez. I didn't learn from him. I learned some things, but the people I was referring to were the people who worked at my company, like the developers who were my technical leads and who knew a lot about Apex development. But Andres Perez is a fantastic instructor, and I've learned a lot also from his videos and his training classes. He's amazing as well. So yeah, good reference there. Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to close. Again, thank you so much for attending, for your comments, for making the session fun for me as well, and for accompanying me today. Thanks for all who watch the stream asynchronously. And if you have any questions, you can always post them in the comments section because I will be watching it. Thank you very much and have a very good day. Bye-bye.